The alarm bells were screaming louder than Kim Day had ever heard them before. She sat in her chair, watching thousands of alien creatures rush into the giant glass meeting hall. Some had tentacles, others had wings, and many looked nothing like anything from Earth. But despite how different they all looked, they all showed the same thing: pure terror. Kim Day felt small in that massive room. She was just one human among all these advanced alien races. Most of them had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, while humans had barely figured out how to leave their own solar system. Earth had only been allowed to join this Galactic Council 5 years ago, and most aliens still thought humans were pretty stupid and backward. Supreme Chancellor Vextal stood at the front of the room. He was a tall grey creature with 8 bright yellow eyes that could look in different directions at the same time. Right now, all 8 eyes were staring at a huge floating screen that showed something horrible: entire star systems that had just disappeared. Not destroyed, not blown up, just gone, like someone had erased them from existence. "The Devourers are real and they're coming," Vextal announced, his voice shaking slightly. "Our computer models show that every living thing in our galaxy will be dead within 2 years." Kim Day felt her stomach drop. The Devourers were like monsters from scary stories that parents told their children. Ancient machines that traveled from galaxy to galaxy, eating everything in their path. She had hoped they were just myths. Around her, alien creatures that had lived for centuries were crying. Some were making strange noises that must have been their version of screaming. A few were praying to their gods in languages she couldn't understand. The smell of fear filled the air, even though different species probably smelled fear differently. The klaxon delegate stood up. It looked like a living crystal that made beautiful ringing sounds when it moved. But now those sounds were harsh and desperate. "We need to start evacuation plans immediately," it chimed. "We must save who we can." "There's nowhere to run," Chancellor Vextal replied, and his words made the room even quieter. "These Devourers have destroyed 3 entire galaxies before. Ours, they don't just kill, they consume everything. Matter, energy, even empty space itself." Kim Day watched as some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy looked completely hopeless. These were creatures that could destroy planets, control time, and bend reality itself. If they were this scared, how bad could these Devourers really be? Then Vextal said something that made no sense at all. "However, we do have one proposal to make. We are formally requesting that Earth and all humans be completely excluded from any military preparations. We want humanity to be kept safe and protected during this war." The enormous room became dead silent. Kim Day could hear her own heartbeat. This made absolutely no sense. Why would these advanced aliens want to protect the most primitive species in the galaxy? Humans didn't have powerful weapons or advanced technology. They couldn't even travel faster than light without using alien technology. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling weak. Her voice seemed tiny in that huge space, but somehow everyone heard her clearly. "Why exactly would you want to protect us? We're the weakest species here. We can barely defend our own planet, let alone help in a galactic war." The way all those alien eyes looked at her made Kim Day's skin crawl. There was something in their expressions that she couldn't quite understand. It wasn't just fear of the Devourers anymore. It was something else. Something that included fear of humans, which made no sense at all. What could possibly make these incredibly advanced aliens afraid of primitive humans? "Because you've done this before," Vextal whispered, and his words hit the room like a physical blow. Kim Day felt her blood turn cold. What did he mean humans had done this before? That was impossible. Humans had only discovered other intelligent life 5 years ago, when the Galactic Council first made contact with Earth. The massive holographic display in the center of the room suddenly changed. Instead of showing the destroyed star systems, it now showed something that made Kim Day's mind reel. Ancient ruins were carved directly into the surface of a neutron star, one of the densest, most dangerous objects in the universe. The symbols and markings looked impossibly familiar. Park Min-ho, the military representative from Earth, squinted at the display and leaned forward in his chair. He was a tough guy who had served in 3 different wars on Earth, but now his face had gone completely pale. "Wait a minute. Those are human mathematical formulas, but that's completely impossible. Humans have barely figured out how to leave our own solar system, let alone carve things into neutron stars. Kim Day stared at the ancient carvings. The mathematical symbols were definitely human. She recognized calculus, physics equations, and geometric patterns that human scientists had developed over centuries. But according to the display, these carvings were millions of years old. How could human mathematics exist in alien archaeology from before humans had even evolved? Chancellor Vextal's 8 eyes focused on the humans in the room. 3 times, in the history of our galaxy, the Devourers have come to consume everything. 3 times they have been stopped and driven back. Each time the few survivors left behind records of their defenders. The display changed again, showing ancient alien texts that had been translated into human languages. Kim Day read the words, with growing horror. The defenders walk on 2 legs like beasts, but fight with the fury of dying stars. They create weapons that should not exist, that break the laws of reality itself. They do not follow any known tactics or strategies, yet they cannot be defeated. Dr. Lee So-young, Earth's expert on alien archaeology, was frantically taking notes. Her hands were shaking as she analyzed the data. The tactical signatures from these ancient battlefields. I've run them through our computers. They match theoretical human warfare patterns that we've never actually used in real combat. Strategies that human military theorists have written about, but never implemented. This was getting more terrifying by the minute. How could ancient aliens have records of human fighting techniques that humans themselves had never used? Vextal continued, his voice growing even quieter and more frightening. Your species doesn't learn how to fight wars. You remember how to fight them. It's buried deep in your genetic code, waiting to wake up when the galaxy needs defenders. Park. Minho stood up, his military training taking over despite his confusion. That's crazy. If humans were some kind of ancient galactic defenders, wouldn't we remember it? Wouldn't there be some record of it in our own history? The memory sleeps. Until it's needed, replied Vextal. But when it wakes up, when humans remember what they really are, he gestured around the room at all the alien representatives. Everyone else suffers almost as much as your enemies do. Kim Day looked around the chamber and finally understood. The expressions on all those alien faces. It wasn't just fear of the coming Devourers. They were terrified of what humans might become when they remembered how to fight this ancient war. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, creatures, with technology beyond human imagination, were all nodding in agreement with Vextal's words. They had seen the records. They knew what happened when humans went to war on a galactic scale, and apparently it was almost as scary as the Devourers themselves. The dead planet Kepler 442c looked like a graveyard that stretched across an entire world. Dr. Choi Jun-seo had studied alien battlefields before, but nothing had prepared him for what he found here. He knelt down next to what used to be a massive Devourer command ship, but now it looked like someone had taken reality itself and twisted it into impossible shapes. The ship's metal hull was bent in ways that hurt to look at. Parts of it seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at the same time. Other sections appeared to be folded inside out, as if someone had crumpled up space itself like a piece of paper. "I've finished analyzing the metal," called out his assistant Yoon Ha-na from across the wreckage. She was a tough scientist who had seen plenty of weird alien technology, but her voice was shaking. "The damage patterns don't match any weapon we know about. It's like someone used space and time as a cutting tool." Dr. Choi stood up and looked around the battlefield. As far as he could see in every direction, there were twisted remains of Devourer ships. These weren't just destroyed. They had been warped into shapes that defied every law of physics he knew. Some ships were turned inside out. Others were stretched like taffy across several miles. A few seemed to be existing in the past and future at the same time. Above them, Captain Kang Tae-hyun was reviewing the scan data from their survey ship. He called down through the radio with information that made everyone stop working. "I've counted the wreckage in this sector. 17 million Devourer vessels were destroyed here. That's more ships than most entire civilizations have ever built. And here's the really weird part. I can't find any evidence that the defenders lost even a single ship." Dr. Choi felt a chill run down his spine. 17 million enemy ships destroyed with 0 casualties on the other side. That wasn't a battle. That was something else entirely. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Dr. Lim Ji-woo was making discoveries in her genetics lab that were keeping her awake at night. She had been studying DNA samples from humans all over the world, looking for clues about what the Galactic Council had. Told them, "I think I've figured out what's happening to us," she told her research partner Oh Sung-min as she pulled up data on her computer screen. These weird DNA sequences that have been showing up in humans everywhere aren't random mutations. They're blueprints. Oh Sung-min leaned over her shoulder to look at the data. Blueprints for what? Mathematical formulas, Dr. Lim replied, pointing at complex patterns in the genetic code. Instructions for manipulating exotic matter and energy in ways that shouldn't be possible. It's like someone wrote the secrets of advanced physics directly into human DNA. The implications were terrifying. Every human on Earth was carrying around genetic instructions for technologies that were beyond anything their civilization had ever dreamed of. But these instructions were dormant, sleeping, waiting for something to activate them. When do they wake up? Oh Seung-min asked, though he seemed afraid to hear the answer. Dr. Lim pulled up another screen showing global DNA analysis. Every single human sample showed the same thing. The mysterious genetic sequences were slowly becoming more active. They wake up when we need them, when humanity faces a threat that requires us to remember what we really are. She stared at the data that showed identical genetic changes happening to humans in Seoul, New York, Lagos, and every other city on Earth. People who had never met each other, who lived on different continents, were all developing the same genetic expressions at the same time. The question isn't if these genes will activate, Dr. Lim said quietly. The question is what happens to us, and to everyone else in the galaxy, when they do. The ancient battlefield on Kepler 442c suddenly made a lot more sense. And that made it even more terrifying. The emergency meeting at the United Nations building in New York was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. World leaders, military commanders and scientists were all shouting at each other, while phones rang constantly with reports from around the globe. Every few minutes, someone would burst through the doors with another impossible story. Admiral Hwang Dong-hyuk stood at the front of the room holding a thick stack of incident reports. His usually calm military demeanor was cracking under the stress. In the last 48 hours, we've had 17 separate cases of ordinary civilians accidentally creating weapons that could destroy cities. Yesterday, a 16-year-old kid in Seoul was trying to fix his broken video game console. Instead, he built something that can manipulate gravity. His neighbors are now floating 3 feet off the ground, and we can't figure out how to reverse it. The room erupted in worried murmurs. President Nam Yoo-jin of the UN Security Council looked exhausted. She had been awake for 3 straight days dealing with crisis after crisis. What about the incident in Busan? A 70-year-old grandmother was knitting a sweater for her grandson, Admiral Hwang continued, his voice getting more strained. Somehow she created a device that exists in 4 different dimensions at the same time. Our physicists can't even understand how it's possible, let alone how she made it with knitting needles and yarn. Dr. Park Hae-jin, a psychiatrist who had been interviewing the affected civilians, raised her hand. The strangest part is what they all say when we ask them how they did it. They all use the same words. It just felt natural, like I was remembering something I already knew. General Seo In-guk slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. Maybe that's because they are remembering. The Galactic Council told us we're designed to fight these devourer things. If that's our natural purpose, why are we trying to suppress it? Because we might not stop with just the devourers, interrupted Dr. Bae Suji, the government's expert on alien psychology. She had been studying the ancient records that the Galactic Council had shared with Earth. The historical data shows that previous human defenders didn't just defeat the enemy. After the wars ended, they spent centuries fixing other civilizations, whether those civilizations wanted to be fixed or not. The room grew quiet as people tried to process what that meant. Nam Yoo-jin rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. The Galactic Council has been sending us messages every hour, begging us to find a way to suppress these emerging abilities. They're absolutely terrified of us. Good, General Seo replied. Maybe it's time the galaxy respected humans instead of treating us like primitive children. You don't understand, Dr. Bay said, pulling up holographic displays of alien historical records. The last time humans activated, they didn't just win the war against the Devourers. They decided that the galaxy's political systems were inefficient, so they restructured them. They thought other species weren't advancing fast enough, so they forced them to evolve. They believed some civilizations were too aggressive, so they rewired their brains to be more peaceful. The implications hit everyone at once. When humans became galactic protectors, they apparently protected the galaxy from everything, including itself. Admiral Huang looked at his reports again. It's getting worse. This morning, a construction worker in Daegu accidentally created a tool that can build bridges across space itself. A teacher in Incheon was trying to explain quantum physics to her students and somehow opened a window into parallel universes. The abilities are spreading faster, Dr. Park added, and the people developing them don't seem to have any control over when or how it happens. They're just going about their normal lives when suddenly they can manipulate reality. Nam Yujin stood up and looked around the room at all the worried faces. So our choice is simple. Either we let humanity evolve into galactic overlords who might decide to fix everyone else, or we try to suppress our natural abilities and hope the Devourers don't kill us all. There's a third option, General Seo said grimly. We could try to control the awakening, learn to use these abilities responsibly. Based on the historical records, Dr. Bay replied, that's never worked before. The government's attempts to control what was happening to humans were failing miserably. Every day brought new incidents that seemed impossible to believe, yet they kept happening all around the world. Moon Jae-sung was just an ordinary factory worker in Ulsan who assembled car parts for a living. During his lunch break on Tuesday, he was sitting in the break room eating his sandwich when he suddenly got the urge to build something. Using nothing but spare electronic parts from the factory floor, he created a small handheld device that looked like a weird combination of a TV remote and a flashlight. When he pressed the button, reality folded in half. A portal opened up in the middle of the factory floor, and half the building simply disappeared into it. Not destroyed, not blown. Up, just gone, as if that part of the building had never existed. 30 workers vanished along with it, though thankfully they were later found safe in what appeared to be a pocket dimension, filled with floating islands and purple skies. When investigators questioned Moon Jae-sung about how he built such an impossible device, his answer was the same as everyone else's. It just made sense to me. Like remembering how to ride a bicycle after not doing it for years. The incidents were happening everywhere now, and they were getting more bizarre by the day. Yang Mi-young was a chef at a small restaurant in Busan. She had been using the same kitchen knife for 15 years to chop vegetables and slice meat. But on Wednesday morning, when she started preparing ingredients for lunch, the knife began cutting through things it shouldn't be able to cut. It sliced through molecular bonds themselves. When she cut a carrot, the knife separated the individual, atoms so cleanly that the carrot turned into a pile of perfectly organized elements. When she accidentally nicked the cutting board, the wood transformed into its basic carbon compounds. She was literally cutting reality apart at the atomic level. I wasn't trying to do anything special, she told the scientists who came to study her knife. I was just cutting vegetables like I do every day. But suddenly I could see the connections between all the tiny particles, and cutting through them felt natural. In Seoul, college student Kim Ho-seok was working on a physics experiment for his class when he accidentally opened a window into parallel universes. His small laboratory setup somehow created a viewing portal that showed dozens of different versions of Earth. Some where dinosaurs never went extinct, others where humans had developed gills and lived underwater, and one particularly disturbing version where everything was made of cheese. I was just trying to measure quantum fluctuations, he explained to his terrified professor. But I could suddenly see how thin the barriers between dimensions really are. Opening a window felt as easy as opening a regular door. Commander Shin Ye-jin was reviewing incident reports at her military base when one of her own soldiers walked through a solid concrete wall during training exercises. Corporal Lee Tae-min had been doing regular obstacle course training when he approached a 12-foot-high concrete barrier. Instead of climbing over it or going around it, he simply walked straight through it, as if it wasn't there. "How did you do that?" Commander Shin asked him afterward. Lee Taemin looked confused by the question. "I just remembered that walls are optional, ma'am. They're only solid if you believe they have to be." These weren't isolated incidents anymore. Reports were flooding in from every continent. A postal worker in Tokyo was delivering mail through solid doors. A farmer in Brazil was growing crops that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. A mechanic in Cairo fixed a broken car engine by convincing the metal parts to repair themselves. Within days of the most dramatic incidents, an emergency delegation from the Galactic Council arrived on Earth. Chancellor Vextol himself led the E group, something that had never happened before in the 5 years since first contact. He found Ambassador Kim Dae in her office at the UN building, where she was drowning in reports of impossible events happening around the world. "Please," Vextal begged, his 8 eyes showing genuine terror, "you must find a way to stop this awakening process. We've seen the historical records of what happens when your species reaches full activation. Last time, they didn't just defeat the Devourers, they spent the next 1,000 years fixing every other civilization in the galaxy, whether we wanted to be fixed or not." Kim Dae looked up from her reports and realized that humanity was becoming something that even the most advanced aliens in the galaxy were afraid of. The death of entire star systems happened so fast that nobody saw it coming. The mining colonies. Around Epsilon, Eridani had been sending their regular daily reports about ore production and equipment maintenance. The messages were boring and routine, exactly what you'd expect from workers doing their jobs in space. Then, in the span of a single heartbeat, everything went silent. Not just the colonies, but the entire star system. The star itself, the planets, the space stations, the asteroid belts, everything simply stopped existing. There wasn't even debris left behind to show that billions of people had once lived there. Captain John Wushik was commanding a reconnaissance ship that had been patrolling the outer edges of the galaxy when he witnessed something that would haunt him forever. His senses showed the Devourers in action for the first time, and what he saw defied every understanding of how the universe worked. "They don't just destroy things," he reported back to headquarters, his voice shaking with barely controlled terror. "They consume everything, matter, energy, even empty space itself. It's like they're erasing reality and replacing it with nothing." The Devourers looked nothing like any machine or creature anyone had ever seen. They were geometric shapes that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once, shifting between forms that hurt to look at directly. When they moved, space itself rippled around them like water. The Galactic Council's military leaders thought they were prepared. They had studied the ancient records, built their most powerful weapons, and assembled the largest battle fleet in galactic history. Over 50,000 ships from hundreds of different species formed a defensive line near Proxima Centauri, ready to make their stand against the Devourer vanguard. Admiral An Sung-ho commanded the combined fleet from his flagship, a massive vessel that could destroy planets. He watched through long-range sensors as the Devourer scouts approached, numbering only in the hundreds compared to his thousands of ships. The battle lasted exactly 7 minutes. The Devourers didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, they seemed to simply decide that the Galactic Council ships shouldn't exist anymore. Reality itself bent around the Devourer vessels, and the laws of physics stopped working properly in their vicinity. Ships that had taken decades to build and were protected by energy shields, powerful enough to withstand supernovas, simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not exploded, not vaporized. They just stopped being real. Admiral Ahn watched in horror as his entire fleet vanished. 50,000 ships and millions of crew members were erased from existence in less time than it took to drink a cup of coffee. The Devourers continued their advance toward the inner systems as if nothing had happened. But then something very strange occurred when the Devourer advance scouts reached the edge of Earth's solar system. They stopped. For the first time in their million-year rampage across multiple galaxies, the Devourers hesitated. Their geometric forms seemed to pulse, with what almost looked like nervousness. Then, impossibly, they began to retreat. The retreat wasn't orderly or strategic. It looked like panic. Dr. Ru Minna was Earth's best expert at translating alien languages. She had spent years learning to understand the communication methods of dozens of different species. When the Devourers started broadcasting signals during their retreat, she worked around the clock to decode their meaning. What she discovered made her blood run cold. "I've managed to translate fragments of their communications," she reported to the emergency council session. "They're saying things like, 'Inheritors detected. They wake from the long sleep. Activate Protocol 7 and retreat to minimum safe distance.'" The room fell silent as everyone processed what this meant. "They know what we are," Dr. Ryu continued, looking directly at Ambassador Kim Day. "The Devourers have encountered humans before, in previous galactic cycles, and they're terrified of us." Kim Day felt a chill run down her spine. The Devourers were ancient machines that had consumed entire galaxies without hesitation. They had just erased the most powerful military fleet in galactic history, like it was nothing. These were beings that treated reality itself as something they could rewrite at will, and they were afraid of humans. "How far did they retreat?" she asked. "They've pulled back to the edge of the solar system and are maintaining a defensive perimeter," Dr. Ryu replied. "It's like they're waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" "For us to fully wake up," Dr. Ryu said quietly. "Their messages suggest they're trying to determine whether humanity has reached full activation yet. If we have, they'll retreat to another galaxy. If we haven't—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood that the Devourers were waiting to see if they could destroy humanity before humans remembered how to fight back. The question was, would humanity wake up in time? The changes happening to humanity's military forces were so rapid and bizarre that even seasoned commanders couldn't believe what they were seeing. Sergeant Major Park Chan-ho had been training soldiers for 20 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what was happening at the training base. He was watching his troops practice with their standard military rifles when Private Kang So-ra suddenly stopped, looked at her weapon with confusion, and then began taking it apart. Using nothing but spare parts from the base workshop, she rebuilt it into something that looked like a cross between a rifle and a piece of abstract art. "What are you doing, Private?" Sergeant Major Park asked. "I'm not sure, sir," Kang So-ra replied, still working on the weapon. "I just suddenly understood how to make it better." When she tested the modified rifle, something impossible happened. The target exploded before she pulled the trigger. She had somehow created a weapon that fired backwards through time, hitting targets in the past. "How did you know how to do that?" Park asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was obvious, sir," she replied, looking genuinely confused by his amazement. "I could see the path the bullet needed to take through time. It was like following a recipe I'd known my whole life." Similar transformations were happening at military bases around the world. Soldiers were instinctively modifying their equipment in ways that defied physics. Some created armor that existed in multiple dimensions at once, making the wearer nearly impossible to hit. Others built communication devices that could send messages across vast distances instantly, ignoring the speed of light entirely. The most dramatic test came when humanity decided to send its first battle group to engage the Devourers directly. Admiral Song Ki-tae commanded a fleet of only 12 ships, a laughably small force compared to the thousands of vessels the Galactic Council had lost. "Sir, are you sure about this?" asked his second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Kim Da-eun. "Intelligence reports show at least 3,000 Devourer vessels in the Alpha Centauri system." Admiral Song looked around the bridge at his crew. Most of them were young officers who had never seen real combat. By all logic, they were about to fly into a massacre. But something deep in his gut told him they would be fine. "Trust your instincts," he told his crew over the ship's intercom. "I know this sounds crazy, but fight like you've done this before. Let your body remember what your mind has forgotten." The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Alpha Centauri and immediately found themselves surrounded by Devourer vessels. The enemy ships were massive geometric forms that seemed to bend space around them, each one larger than Earth's biggest cities. What happened next defied every principle of military strategy ever written. The human ships didn't form defensive. formations, or try to coordinate their attacks. Instead, each vessel began moving independently, following patterns that seemed random but somehow perfectly synchronized. They flew through space like dancers who had practiced the same routine for centuries. Navigation Officer Yu Jun-ho found himself plotting courses before he consciously decided where to go. "Admiral, I'm not sure how, but I know exactly where. Every enemy ship is going to be in the next 5 minutes." "Then take us there," Admiral Song replied calmly. The weapons officers began firing at empty space, but their shots arrived precisely when Devourer vessels moved into those locations. It was as if the humans were fighting an enemy they could see in the future. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it ended, all 3,000 Devourer vessels had been destroyed, their hulls twisted into impossible shapes that looked like modern art sculptures. The human fleet hadn't suffered so much as a scratch on their paint. "How did we do that?" Lieutenant Commander Kim asked, staring at the wreckage surrounding them. Yu Jun-ho looked up from his navigation console with a dazed expression. "I don't know. I just knew where they were going to be before they went there. It was like I could see the entire battle playing out in my head before it happened." Weapons Officer Lee Tae-hyun nodded in agreement. "I kept firing at empty space, but somehow I knew the enemy ships would be there when the shots arrived. It felt like muscle memory." Admiral Song stood quietly on the bridge, watching the aftermath of their impossible victory. His crew had just accomplished something that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations couldn't do with 50,000 ships, and they had done it instinctively, without any formal training or advanced planning. "Send a message back to Earth," he ordered. "Tell them we've confirmed what the Galactic Council suspected. Humanity doesn't learn how to fight these wars." He paused, looking out at the twisted remains of the Devourer fleet. "We remember how to fight them. When the main Devourer invasion force finally arrived, it brought with it horrors that no living being in the galaxy had ever imagined. The enemy fleet was so massive that it blocked out entire sections of the night sky. Billions upon billions of ships moved in perfect formation, each one a geometric nightmare that seemed to exist in multiple realities at the same time. These weren't like the scout vessels that had retreated from Earth's solar system. The main invasion force carried weapons that could literally delete things from history itself. When they destroyed a planet, it wasn't just blown up. It was erased so completely that the universe forgot it had ever existed. Stars that had burned for billions of years simply stopped, leaving behind empty space where solar systems used to be. The Galactic Council threw everything they had at the invaders. Every species contributed their most advanced warships, their most powerful weapons, their bravest warriors. The combined fleet was larger than anything the galaxy had ever assembled. Millions of vessels from thousands of different civilizations, all working together for the first time in galactic history. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, there was nothing left of the Galactic Council's forces except empty space and the echoes of final distress calls. The Devourers had erased entire fleets from existence so thoroughly that even the memory of the ships seemed to fade from the minds of those who had known them. But then humanity entered the war, and everything changed in ways that no one could understand. Captain Lee Ha-young was commanding a human destroyer when she received orders to defend the Vega system from an incoming Devourer attack. The problem was, according to all intelligence reports, the Devourers weren't planning to attack Vega for another 3 days. "Ma'am, are you sure about these coordinates?" asked her navigation officer. "There's no enemy activity in the Vega system." "There will be," Captain Lee replied with strange certainty. "Take us there now." Her ship arrived at Vega 3 days before the Devourer fleet was supposed to show up. When the enemy vessels finally appeared, they found human forces already in perfect defensive positions, as if the humans had known exactly when and where the attack would come. "How did you know we were coming?" demanded a confused Galactic Council observer who was monitoring the battle. Captain Lee looked at him as if the question made no sense. "Time isn't linear in combat. You don't fight when the enemy arrives. You fight when you need to fight. The battle was always going to happen here, so this is where we needed to be." The human military response defied every rule of warfare ever written. Major Han Kyung-soo was leading ground forces on a planet that was being invaded by Devourer machines. Instead of using conventional weapons, his soldiers began manipulating black holes as tactical tools. They would create tiny black holes in their hands and throw them at enemy positions like grenades. "How are your troops doing that?" asked a terrified alien military advisor. "It's simple," Major Han replied, while casually tossing a miniature black hole that swallowed an entire devourer. "Battalion. You just convince gravity to work differently in a small area. Physics is more flexible than most people think." Colonel Im Chae-won's battalion was even more unsettling to observe. Her soldiers fought with perfect knowledge of battles that hadn't happened yet. They would take cover from enemy fire before the enemy had decided to shoot. They would reload their weapons before running out of ammunition. They moved like dancers performing a routine they had practiced for years. "My soldiers keep talking about battles they haven't fought yet," Colonel Im explained to a group of bewildered alien generals. "They remember charging across fields that don't exist, fighting enemies they haven't met, but the memories help them know what to do now." Across dozens of star systems, human forces appeared wherever devourer attacks were planned, often arriving before the enemy had even left their staging areas. Human soldiers fought with weapons that seemed to bend reality itself, using tactics that violated every known principle of military strategy. For the first time in over 1,000,000 years, the devourers began to retreat. Communications Officer Bayek, Yarin was monitoring enemy transmissions when she intercepted what appeared to be the devourers' final message before their complete withdrawal from the galaxy. The translation made her blood run cold. "The gardener's wake. The cycle turns. We withdraw to the deep void." She immediately reported the message to her superiors, but its meaning was clear to everyone who heard it. The devourers weren't just retreating from this battle. They were fleeing the galaxy entirely, just as they had done 3 times before in galactic history. Humanity wasn't just the galaxy's defenders. They were its gardeners, and the devourers knew that when the gardeners woke up, it was time to leave before the real work began. The question that terrified everyone, including many humans themselves, was what kind of gardening humanity would do next. Ambassador Kim Dae stood in what remained of the Great Galactic Council chamber, but it looked very different now. Most of the seats were empty. Many species had simply vanished during the devourer invasion, while others had fled to distant parts of the galaxy. The few representatives who remained looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and terror. The war against the devourers was over. Humanity had won with such overwhelming efficiency that it was almost frightening. In less than 2 weeks, every single devourer vessel had been destroyed or driven from the galaxy. The ancient enemy that had consumed 3 previous galactic civilizations had been eliminated so completely that it was as if they had never existed. But the victory had come at a cost that no one had anticipated. Chancellor Vextal approached. Kim Dae slowly, his 8 eyes showing an emotion she had never seen in him before. Genuine fear mixed with reluctant respect. The arrogant alien leader who had once treated humans like primitive children now spoke to her as if she might decide his species' fate with a casual word. "Now you understand why we were afraid," he said quietly. "Your species doesn't just fight wars and then go home. You reshape reality itself to make sure those wars can never happen again." Kim Dae looked around the chamber at the few remaining alien representatives. They were all watching her carefully, waiting to see what humanity would decide to do next. She realized that they weren't just grateful for being saved from the devourers. They were terrified of what their saviors might do to them. Captain Jung Woo-jin approached with a report that confirmed everyone's worst fears. "Ma'am, human forces throughout the galaxy are broadcasting what they call recall signals. We're detecting responses from thousands of different species. It appears that humans have been embedded as sleeper agents in alien populations for millennia, and now they're all waking up and remembering their true purpose." The implications hit Kim Dae like a physical blow. Humans weren't just recent arrivals to the galactic community. They had been here all along, hidden among other species, waiting for the right moment to activate and begin their work. Dr. Komi Jin's research team had been studying the genetic data from humans around the galaxy, and her findings painted an even more disturbing picture. "Ambassador, we've discovered the truth about our species' role in the galactic ecosystem. We're not defenders in the traditional sense. We're gardeners." "What does that mean?" Kim Day asked, though she was afraid. She already knew the answer. Every galactic cycle, when the Devourers return, humanity awakens to eliminate the threat. But we don't stop there. We spend the following centuries guiding the surviving civilizations toward what we consider optimal development. We prune away aggressive tendencies, redirect technological advancement, and restructure social systems according to human ideals. Kim Day felt sick to her stomach. The historical record suddenly made sense. Previous human interventions hadn't just defeated the Devourers, they had completely reshaped galactic civilization according to human standards of peace, efficiency, and progress. As if summoned by her thoughts, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Human ships were taking positions around every major world, not as conquerors, but as peacekeepers. They were broadcasting what they called guidance protocols to confused alien populations. On the industrial world of Kepler 438b, human advisors were already helping the native species redesign their factories to be more environmentally friendly. On the war-torn planet Gliese 667c, human mediators were ending a 1,000-year conflict by convincing both sides that violence was inefficient. On the overcrowded world of Proxima b, human planners were reorganizing the entire planetary government to reduce inequality. The aliens weren't being forced to accept these changes. They were being convinced that the changes were their own ideas. Human influence was so subtle and persuasive that most species genuinely believed they were choosing to transform their civilizations voluntarily. Chancellor Vextal watched the reports with growing horror. "This is what happened before. Your species doesn't conquer. You optimize. Within a few generations, every civilization in the galaxy will be organized according to human principles. We'll all become peaceful, efficient, and perfectly managed." "Is that such a bad thing?" Kim Day asked, though her heart wasn't in the question. "What about choice?" Vextal replied. "What about the right to make our own mistakes, to develop at our own pace, to find our own solutions to our problems?" Kim Day realized that the Galactic Council's original plea had been completely misunderstood. They hadn't begged humanity to be spared from the war because they thought humans were too weak to fight. They had begged because they knew humans were too effective at bringing peace. The choice now fell to her. She could allow humanity to complete its ancient programming and guide the galaxy toward what humans considered optimal civilization. Or she could try to convince her species to return to dormancy and let the galaxy develop naturally, with all the chaos and inefficiency that entailed. As she watched human peacekeepers beginning their gentle but irresistible work of reshaping galactic civilization, Ambassador Kim Day whispered the truth that no one wanted to acknowledge. The question was never whether we could stop the Devourers. The question is whether anyone can stop us. The cycle was complete, and humanity's real work was just beginning.